The moment the reception hall doors swung open, the festive hum collapsed into a stunned hush as the towering wedding cake trembled on its pedestal, wobbling like it was ready to crash at any second. Guests gasped and froze, a clustered sea of whispers swelling around the room, while the bride stared helplessly at the leaning tiers, her heart racing at the thought of her perfect day slipping apart before her eyes. The groom reached toward her with confusion tightening his expression, but before he could speak, the groom's sister stepped forward with a veneer of concern that looked almost too polished, glancing around as if checking who might be watching. A faint scraping sound echoed beneath the table, something no one else seemed to hear. Then, with a sharp creak, the entire cake tilted further, defying belief. What could cause such a flawless creation to fail? And why did the groom's sister look almost relieved? What would you do if your greatest saboteur stood just inches away, acting innocent? Could this be the most shocking wedding disaster ever caught on camera? The moment after the cake lurched forward felt suspended in time, with every sound in the hall sinking into a muffled echo. The bride stood frozen, unable to process how something crafted with so much care could be moments from complete ruin, and the groom instinctively placed himself beside her, as if shielding her from the emotional blow. Guests whispered in confused clusters, trying to guess what could have caused such a failure, while the wedding planner paced around the base of the table with rising suspicion. The groom's sister hovered nearby, her expression flickering between feigned sympathy and something colder, her eyes always drifting back to the shifting cake. The cameraman, sensing something wasn't right, positioned himself strategically. The room braced for disaster. As the murmurs swelled, the groom moved closer to the table to inspect the damage, but the bride reached out as if silently asking him not to risk making it worse. The wedding planner crouched slightly, noting subtle scratches on the surface beneath the cake, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. Guests craned their necks from afar, eager yet nervous to see what would happen next. The groom's sister shifted uncomfortably when the planner's gaze locked briefly onto her, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. The cameraman adjusted his lens, sensing the importance of capturing each expression. The cake wobbled again, prompting gasps throughout the room. The bride's breath trembled as she stepped closer, torn between the urge to save the cake and the fear of making a wrong move. The groom gently steadied her arm, trying to give her courage without saying a word. The tension became almost tangible, wrapping around every person in the room as they waited for the inevitable. A waiter hurried forward with a stack of napkins, unsure why he was even drawn into the chaos. The groom's sister, meanwhile, maintained her flawless composure, offering shallow reassurances that felt strangely rehearsed. All the while, the cameraman captured her every glance, her every step, her every flicker of guilt, hidden beneath false calm. A collective gasp rippled through the room when the top tier shifted again, rolling dangerously close to the edge. The bride covered her mouth, unable to bear watching, while the groom moved toward the cake with a mix of desperation and disbelief. The wedding planner signaled the staff to bring supports, though she didn't know if they would arrive in time. The groom's sister stepped back just enough to distance herself while maintaining a facade of concern, her eyes darting around as if measuring how much she was being observed. The cameraman steadied his equipment. Something deep in his gut told him this moment was far from accidental. Every heartbeat in the hall seemed synchronized with the cake's unstable sway. The moment the cake steadied itself for a brief pause, tension lingered like static in the air, making every step around it feel hesitant and heavy. The bride whispered something urgently to the wedding planner, who nodded while still scanning the table with sharp focus. The groom tried to reassure nearby guests, but his nervous glances kept drifting back toward the trembling tiers. The groom's sister remained unnervingly silent, her posture carefully controlled, as if she were protecting a secret that weighed more than the cake itself. The cameraman quietly shifted angles, drawn to the way her eyes darted whenever someone examined the base. Even the music seemed to lower itself, as though the room understood that this moment was more delicate than the dessert that held everyone hostage. As the planner examined the table again, she leaned in closer and pointed out small indentations that didn't match the normal weight distribution, causing the bride to frown with unease. The groom crouched down beside the table, trying to see what the planner saw, but the groom's sister quickly stepped between them with a soft smile that felt strangely timed. Her attempt to distract them only deepened the suspicion in the cameraman's mind, leading him to inch closer with quiet determination. Guests began drifting in cautious semicircles, whispering theories that ranged from structural flaws to sabotage. The air felt heavy with the kind of uncertainty that prickles the skin, the kind that hints at truth is waiting to be uncovered. The bride attempted to regain control of the moment, straightening her posture as she asked the planner whether the cake could still be safe. The planner responded with cautious uncertainty, explaining that something had clearly compromised the structure, but she needed more time to assess it. The groom nodded, trying to stay supportive, though his tension was evident in the way he clenched his jaw. Meanwhile, the groom's sister offered insincere reassurances, insisting everything would be fine. Yet her tone carried an odd sharpness that contrasted her words. The cameraman captured it all, sensing the contradictions in her behavior. Each second stretched longer than the last as doubt seeped through the room. The planner moved to the opposite side of the table, squinting as she noticed a subtle shift in the support rods, something that shouldn't have happened without interference. The bride stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of the tablecloth, desperate for answers that kept slipping away. The groom stood quietly behind her, torn between comforting her and confronting the rising suspicion he didn't want to voice. The groom's sister suddenly suggested calling the bakery, her voice too eager, as though hoping to redirect blame before questions became too pointed. The cameraman noticed the way her eyes flickered anxiously, and for the first time he zoomed directly in on her. As the planner stood up, her expression hinted at a troubling realization she wasn't ready to vocalize. The bride, sensing the weight of her silence, felt her stomach twist in dread, convinced that something unnatural had happened. The groom placed a steadying hand on her back, though worry darkened his eyes. The groom's sister commented softly that accidents happen, but her voice wavered in a way that didn't match her attempt at calm. The cameraman, now certain he was witnessing more than a simple mishap, discreetly positioned himself behind her, his lens capturing every subtle twitch of her hands. The tension swelled again, thick enough to hush nearby conversations as everyone awaited the planner's verdict. "I'll wait." The planner's silence stretched painfully as she continued circling the table, her eyes narrowing with each new detail she uncovered. The bride followed her movements anxiously, trying to piece together the fragments of a truth that felt too unsettling to name. The groom hovered between them, torn between hope and dread, sensing the emotional storm building beside him. The groom's sister stood with her arms folded tightly, her gaze darting away whenever the planner leaned closer to the compromised supports. The cameraman lingered just behind her, the weight of suspicion guiding his lens. Guests continued gathering in restless clusters, whispering faster with every minute that passed. Something deeply wrong was lingering in the air, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it aloud. The planner finally paused near the back corner of the table, where the tablecloth draped unevenly, as if something beneath it had been moved recently. The bride stepped closer, her heartbeat quickening as she sensed the planner's focus sharpening into certainty. The groom knelt again, reaching out to touch the edge of the cloth before hesitating, unsure if uncovering the truth would ease or worsen the tension choking the room. The groom's sister rushed forward, insisting everything looked normal, her voice strained with an urgency that only deepened suspicion. The cameraman shifted to capture her expression, noticing the small twitch in her jaw that betrayed her composure. Guests fell into silence as the planner slowly lifted the tablecloth. Gasps rippled outward the moment the cloth revealed scattered crumbs, smeared frosting, and tiny wooden splinters that had no business being beneath. A flawless cake. The bride covered her mouth, stunned by the undeniable signs of tampering that turned her sinking worry into sharp devastation. The groom stared at the mess with disbelief, his hands curling into fists as he tried to understand how something so meaningful could be treated with such carelessness. The groom's sister let out a shaky laugh, claiming it must have fallen during delivery, though her eyes refused to meet anyone's. The cameraman leaned in, zooming on the evidence, his instincts screaming that this moment was pivotal. Guests exchanged glances, tension coiling tighter around the room's fading joy. The planner straightened slowly, her expression heavy with the weight of what she had just uncovered, and the bride felt tears threatening as the truth inched closer to daylight. The groom stepped behind her, placing a warm hand on her shoulder, but even that comfort couldn't quiet the storm rising within her. The groom's sister began pacing with forced frustration, insisting someone else must have touched the table, her voice cracking under the pressure of so many eyes on her. The cameraman watched her intensely, capturing every flicker of panic that crossed her face as the planner explained that the marks were fresh and deliberate. The room grew colder, as though the celebration itself sensed a betrayal unfolding. The planner exhaled slowly before speaking, her voice low but firm, as she explained that the supports had been intentionally loosened and the evidence pointed toward manual interference. The bride's heart dropped as the guests reacted with outraged whispers, the shock rippling through the hall like a wave. The groom's hands tightened protectively around her, while the groom's sister froze mid-step, her face draining of color as though the walls themselves had just accused her. The cameraman steadied his footing, bracing himself for whatever was about to follow. The bride felt the entire day balancing on a knife's edge, every emotion amplified by the crushing possibility that this wasn't an accident, but a betrayal carried out by someone close. A heavy silence filled the room as the planner's words settled like a weight on everyone's shoulders, and the bride felt her breath falter, struggling to understand why such cruelty had found a place in a moment meant for joy. The groom stood behind her with the rigid stillness of someone trying to keep rage from boiling over. The groom's sister shifted uneasily, her eyes darting toward the nearest exit, as though planning a quiet escape from rising suspicion. Guests murmured in troubled waves, their gazes bouncing between the evidence and the sister's increasingly restless posture. The cameraman raised his device a little higher, sensing the truth was close enough to touch. The bride swallowed hard as an unsettling realization bloomed inside her. This wasn't just sabotage. It felt personal. The planner stepped closer to the bride and groom, offering quiet reassurance, but her eyes never left the sister, whose posture grew increasingly defensive. The bride felt a tremor in her hands as she struggled to hold herself together, searching the sister's expression for even a hint of remorse and finding none. The groom, noticing the shift in her demeanor, tried to ask a calm question, but the sister interrupted with a frantic denial that only deepened the tension. Guests began inching closer, their curiosity overpowering their caution. The cameraman maneuvered behind the sister, the subtle movement unnoticed by most as he tried to capture the truth hiding in her reactions. The room buzzed with the anticipation of an answer no one wanted to say aloud. The groom's sister took a step back, her breath quickening as she blamed the bakery, the staff, and even the planner, her excuses tumbling out faster than anyone could keep up. The bride stared at her, bewildered by the desperation in her voice, sensing that the collapse of her lies was happening faster than she could hide it. The groom remained silent, his expression tightening with every word she uttered, as though he was finally seeing a side of her he had long ignored. Guests looked on with wide eyes, torn between sympathy and disbelief. The cameraman, noticing the sister's trembling hands, zoomed in on the smallest details, knowing these moments would matter. The planner folded her arms, unmoved by the frantic explanation. As the accusations grew louder, the planner finally raised her hand, calling for calm with a firm tone that cut through the chaos. The bride exhaled shakily, grateful for the brief pause, though her heart continued to pound with dread. The groom's sister froze mid-sentence, her spirit deflating as she realized the planner wasn't going to entertain her excuses. The groom stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with hurt, asking the one question everyone else was too afraid to bring up. The sister's reaction was immediate. A sharp flinch, a forced smile, and a trembling denial that didn't convince anyone. The cameraman circled subtly, sensing the unraveling moment was reaching its peak. Every guest watched was silent anticipation. The sisters' denial grew weaker as the groom repeated his question, his voice soft but filled with the weight of years of trust. The bride watched the tension tear through him, feeling the ache of seeing someone she loved forced into such heartbreak. The sister opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, her expression twisting into something between guilt and defiance. Guests leaned forward, breathless and silent, waiting for the confession she fought to suppress. The cameraman held his shot steady, capturing every flicker of emotion, knowing this moment was the hinge of the entire disaster. And finally, the planner asked her directly whether she had touched the cake. The sister froze completely, as if the entire world had paused with her. The silence that followed the planner's question felt so deep it almost swallowed the room, leaving every guest suspended in a breath they didn't dare release. The bride stood frozen, gripping the edge of her dress to stop her hands from shaking as she waited for the sister's response. The groom watched with eyes clouded by heartbreak, bracing himself for an answer that could reshape everything he thought he understood. The sister's lips parted slightly, yet no words came, only the faint tremble of someone cornered by truth. The planner remained steady, her gaze sharp but patient, knowing the moment required calm precision. The cameraman tightened his focus, capturing the tension that pulsed through the air like a quiet storm building pressure. The bride prayed silently that she wouldn't hear the worst. The sister finally inhaled sharply, attempting to regain control of the moment as she insisted once again that she had nothing to do with the cake's condition. But her voice cracked midway, betraying the calm she desperately tried to project. The bride felt her chest tighten, not out of anger but from the painful uncertainty twisting inside her. The groom stepped forward again, asking gently why she seemed so afraid if she had done nothing wrong. The sister blinked rapidly, her eyes darting to the guests who watched her like a cornered flame flickering in the wind. The planner stood silently, waiting for the truth to reveal itself, while the cameraman moved slightly to the side, capturing the shifting expressions from a wider angle. The tension grew unbearable. As the sisters' excuses continued unraveling, the planner interjected with a calm firmness, explaining the physical evidence again and pointing out how the marks aligned with deliberate interference rather than an accident. The bride felt something inside her crack as the planner's words settled over the room like a verdict. The groom's breath hitched as he turned to his sister, his voice barely above a whisper when he asked her if she truly wanted to ruin the day he had dreamt of for so long. The sister's composure finally faltered, her shoulders collapsing inward, and for the first time she seemed genuinely lost. Guests exchanged widened glances, realizing they were watching a family fracture right before their eyes. The cameraman captured everything in devastating clarity. The sister backed up a step, her voice trembling as she claimed she only wanted to protect the groom from a wedding she believed wasn't right for him. Her justification causing a wave of stunned disbelief across the guests. The bride felt the words hit her like a heavy blow, her chest tightening as she processed the painful confession wrapped in twisted reasoning. The groom's expression shifted from hurt to a quiet, simmering anger as he reminded her that this day was his choice, not hers. The planner stood with folded arms, no longer needing to guide the moment as the truth spilled out on its own. The cameraman filmed the sisters unraveling, capturing the raw frustration and the guilt battling across her face. The hall felt colder now. With the confession hanging in the air, the groom took a breath that shook from the weight of betrayal, and told his sister how deeply she had wounded him and the woman he loved. The bride blinked back tears, not from the ruined cake but from witnessing the painful rift forming before her. The sister's eyes glistened with a mixture of regret and defiance, unsure whether to apologize or lash out further. Guests stood in utter silence, holding their breaths for whatever would come next. The planner gently advised that the situation needed clarity, not chaos, and encouraged the groom to ask the question that hovered over them all. He turned toward his sister with heartbreak etched into every line of his face and asked her directly why she truly wanted the wedding to fail. The sister flinched at the groom's question, her breath catching as though the truth had been pressed directly against her chest. The bride felt her pulse quicken, watching the fragile moment unfold, with the dread of someone bracing for an answer that could cut deeper than any sabotage. Guests leaned in subtly, sensing the shift from denial to something dangerously close to confession. The planner stood firm, giving the sisters space to speak while making it clear there was no path out but honesty. The groom's trembling patience filled the hall, each second stretching longer than the last. The sister finally opened her mouth, but only a whisper came out, barely enough to be understood. The cameraman tightened his grip on the device, aware that what she said next might change everything. The sister's whisper grew into shaky words, as she admitted she couldn't stand the idea of her brother choosing someone else over her, revealing years of possessiveness she had disguised as concern. The bride felt a cold ache settle in her stomach, stunned by the raw selfishness behind the confession. The groom stepped back slightly, hurt radiating through him as he realized the depth of her resentment. Guests exchanged shocked glances, finally understanding the pattern of bitterness that had silently trailed the couple all day. The planner's jaw tightened, yet she stayed silent, letting the sister unravel at her own pace. The cameraman shifted gently, capturing the moment the sister's carefully crafted image cracked, exposing the truth she had hidden for so long. As the confession spread through the room like a chilling breeze, the sister's emotions spiraled, her voice rising in panicked desperation as she claimed she had only wanted to protect the groom from a life she believed would take him away. The bride felt her throat tighten, struggling to understand how love could twist so painfully into sabotage. The groom closed his eyes briefly, as if searching for the strength to stay calm, while his sister's words echoed with misplaced fear. Guests shifted uncomfortably, torn between pity and disbelief as they watched her unravel. The planner finally spoke softly, explaining that love built on control only destroys what it tries to keep. The cameraman continued filming, capturing the trembling collapse of a truth long overdue. The groom stepped toward his sister, his voice quiet, but filled with a heartbreak that silenced even the closest whispers around them. He told her that love didn't mean control, and that sabotaging the wedding only pushed him further away. The bride watched the exchange with a mix of sorrow and empathy, struggling to reconcile the sister's wrongdoing with the raw vulnerability now showing through her tears. The sister's knees seemed to weaken as she realized the consequences of her actions, her eyes darting between the cake, the guests, and her brother whose trust she had shattered. The planner nodded gently, urging the groom to stay steady. The cameraman leaned in subtly, sensing the emotional peak approaching with unbearable intensity. The sister finally broke down, her voice trembling as she apologized, though the apology wavered between regret and a lingering disbelief that her actions had caused so much harm. The bride felt her chest loosen slightly, torn between wanting peace and acknowledging the hurt that had been inflicted. The groom took a slow breath, telling his sister that healing couldn't begin until she accepted the truth of what she had done. The room fell into a heavy silence once more, guests unsure whether to comfort her or keep their distance. The planner glanced toward the cameraman, who subtly nodded, knowing the footage captured every painful detail. The bride clung to the hope that this confrontation, however devastating, might finally bring clarity. Everything now hung on what the groom would decide next. The groom stood still for a long, heavy moment, his face drawn with the weight of every painful truth that had surfaced throughout the evening. The bride watched him anxiously, hoping he wouldn't let the chaos overshadow the love that had led them here. The sister sobbed quietly, her shoulders trembling with the reality of her own choices, yet unsure if forgiveness was something she deserved. Guests lingered in a tense hush, waiting for some kind of closure to ease the strain that clung to every breath. The planner stepped aside respectfully, giving the family space to decide what came next. The groom finally lifted his head, looking between the bride and his sister with a steady resolve that softened the air around him. It was clear a decision had been made, one that would define the rest of the night. The groom approached his sister slowly, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his eyes. His voice carried a mixture of hurt and compassion as he told her that while he loved her, he could not excuse the hurt she had caused, nor pretend it was rooted in anything other than fear. The bride held her breath, overwhelmed by the tenderness he managed to maintain even in heartbreak. The sister's tears flowed harder as she nodded, her expression crumbling into remorse she could no longer hide. Guests shifted quietly, moved by the emotional gravity of the moment. The planner stood near the cake, keeping a careful watch as the groom's words softened the room. The cameraman captured every nuance, understanding this was the moment the entire story hinged upon. With a steadying breath, the groom told his sister that he needed to protect the life he was building, even if it meant enforcing boundaries she had never allowed before. The bride felt her heart swell with both relief and sadness, recognizing how difficult the moment was for him. The sister lowered her gaze, her voice cracking as she finally admitted she had let jealousy consume her, acknowledging the reality she had refused to face. Guests nodded subtly, their expressions softening as understanding replaced judgment. The planner stepped forward, confirming that the cake could be stabilized enough to save the evening, bringing a small spark of hope into the room. The cameraman zoomed out slightly, capturing the soft shift from destruction to healing. Once the sister composed herself enough to speak clearly, she apologized again, this time without excuses, only raw regret. The bride approached her slowly, unsure what she would say until the words naturally found their place. She told the sister that while the hurt couldn't be erased, she hoped it could eventually be healed, not for the sake of the day, but for the sake of the family they both cared about. The sister broke into quiet sobs, accepting the forgiveness with visible relief. The groom stepped in, wrapping his arms around both of them, creating a fragile but genuine moment of unity. Guests exhaled as one, their tension falling away. The planner signaled the staff to secure the cake, restoring the reception's spirit brick by brick. The cameraman captured this unexpected moment of grace. As the cake was stabilized and the lights dimmed for the evening's celebration, the bride and groom took their place at the center of the hall, finally reclaiming the joy that had nearly been destroyed. The sister stood off to the side, subdued but visibly grateful for the second chance she never expected. Guests clapped gently as the couple shared a quiet, heartfelt moment, letting the chaos of the day fade beneath the soft music that began to flow through the room. The planner surveyed the hall with pride, knowing she had helped steer the night back to its rightful path. The cameraman lowered his device, now holding hours of footage that told a story far deeper than a wedding alone. And as the newlyweds finally shared their first dance, the bride felt peace settle over her like a warm, steady light.